In over 100 years of bodybuilding history, these four men stand out above all the rest as defining their era of bodybuilding. First up, we have Eugene Sandow. He's known as the father of modern day bodybuilding. He not only sculpted a physique that was like way ahead of his time, but he also laid the groundwork for the sport of bodybuilding as we know it. This guy was known for his symmetry and his muscular development. He had that ideal physique, kind of like a Greek statue. So in a sense, he was the first modern day bodybuilder. But before that, he was kind of a strongman competitor, and back then, those two things were kind of one and the same in many ways. But he did invent the first bodybuilding show in 1901, and that was called the Great Competition. So Eugene was kind of the standard of bodybuilding, and he created the sport as we kind of know it today. So when you think of Bronze Era bodybuilders, this guy is almost always the first one to come up. That's why he is the definition of the Bronze Era bodybuilders. Now, for each of these eras, it can be hard to define one exact person, so I'm going to give kind of an honorable mention for each one as well. Either one could really be the definition of the era, but typically the first one I'm going to say is the one that everyone thinks of. I'm also going to be giving stats for each one of these guys. These stats come from several different places and aren't necessarily like super accurate, because some of these we just really couldn't know for sure, but it's kind of more legend or what people, said that they had or whatnot. But for instance, Eugene Sandow, he's listed at anywhere from about 5'8" to 5'9". His stage weight was around 190 pounds. He had 18-inch biceps, which is kind of crazy for back then. He had a waist of 30 inches and a chest of 48 inches. This guy had crazy feats of strength and just like really crazy athletic abilities too. Like there's this old video of him posing where he's actually doing a backflip. And it's actually pretty wild, just the fact that a bodybuilder could do a backflip like that, especially back then. So he was an athlete. So his body wasn't just for show, but he was able to use it quite well. In case you don't know, this is actually who the Mr. Olympia trophy is named after today. The Mr. Olympia trophy is known as the Sandow trophy, and that's why, because of Eugene Sandow, the father of modern day bodybuilding. So whenever you win the Mr. Olympia, you get the Sandow trophy. Coming in at an honorable mention for the Bronze Era bodybuilders is actually another guy who is just did some wild stuff, and his name is George Hackenschmidt. I believe I'm saying his name right, but this guy was crazy and he was super buff. I mean, look at this dude, especially back then when they didn't have machines and stuff like they do now. And speaking of machines, this guy is credited for actually creating the bench press and the hack squat. That's how the hack squat got its name, because it was created by George Hackenschmidt. Now he's listed at about 5'9", around 218 pounds, and it looks like he had biceps around 19 inches, a chest around 52 inches, and a waist of about 34 inches. This guy looks big. Like, he looks bigger than Eugene for sure. He had an emphasis on doing a lot of compound exercises, obviously creating things like the hack squat and the bench press, he would. But that makes sense why he was like just extremely strong, especially for back then. A lot of Bronze Era bodybuilders didn't have huge chest. In fact, they didn't have much of a chest at all. But this guy, for that time, had a pretty good sized chest. Very impressive. So the Bronze Era of bodybuilding is typically seen as like 1940 and below. Now we're moving into the next generation, known as the Silver Era of bodybuilding. And the number one person that comes to mind for most people and for myself is the one and only Steve Reeves. This guy kind of laid the foundation for what Arnold would eventually become. He was a world famous bodybuilder and actor, and he had what a lot of people consider kind of the perfect physique. Not too big, not too small, really aesthetic with a small narrow waist. This guy was a little bit taller than the previous guys. He was 6'1" and came in around 215 to 220 pounds or so on stage. It's said that he had about 18.5-inch biceps, a 52-inch chest, and maybe a 29-inch waist. That's what I saw. So a lot of these numbers could be a little bit off, and a lot of these are coming from the website greatestphysiques.com. But yeah, he was an actor who played Hercules, which Arnold later played, and he actually inspired Arnold to do that. He was a Mr. World, Mr. Universe, and he was really one of the first bodybuilders that became kind of a global icon. Like, a lot of people knew about this guy. Now, up next as an honorable mention is John Grimmick. This guy is like one of the first guys where you're starting to see a lot of mass and a lot of bulk. He was a little shorter than someone like Steve Reeves at 5'8", but he weighed in around a whopping 220 pounds. He just really took his physique to the next level in terms of just really getting close to maxing it out for his frame. He was extremely strong, but also known for actually being pretty flexible as well. He was Mr. America in 1940 and 1941, and Mr. Universe in 1948. And he actually competed in weightlifting in the 1936 Olympic Games. And if you guys have heard of the magazine Muscular Development, he was actually an editor for that. And in case you were wondering about gear, steroids, when they came into the picture, it's typically seen that bodybuilders got a hold of them in the late silver era. So they really started to become predominant in the 50s/60s or so. Up next, we're moving into the golden era of bodybuilding, which is kind of the late 1960s to the 1980s. And this has some of the most famous bodybuilders of all time, including the one that had the most influence on all of bodybuilding in history, I would say, and that's Arnold Schwarzenegger. This guy dominated bodybuilding, especially in the 70s. He won the Mr. Olympia 7 times, probably could have won more if he hadn't retired a little bit early and then came back. But obviously this guy is a global sensation. If you're watching this video and you don't know who this guy is, then I'm actually kind of shocked. Go do your research. Look up who this guy is. Watch his movies. So like I said earlier, Arnold was inspired by Steve Reeves, but he was also inspired by people like Reg Park and Charles Atlas. This is kind of what laid the foundation for his whole career. He knew he wanted to come over from Austria to America and be the best bodybuilder of all times and win the Mr. Universe and win the Mr. Olympia. And he did it more than anyone else up until that point in history. He's known for having just an incredible physique, a really aesthetically pleasing physique. A lot of people from the golden era had that like kind of ideal physique, which is kind of why modern day classic physique bodybuilding is kind of based on that era, just with bigger legs, of course. So the stats for Arnold are kind of all over the place, ranging from he's like 6 foot to 6'2". His stage weight was around 235 or so. His biceps are listed at 22 inches. His chest at 57 inches, and his waist, I've seen anything from 30 inches to 34 inches. So probably somewhere on the higher end, I would guess is more accurate. But regardless, this guy had an incredible physique. His 2 best muscle groups would actually still do really well in bodybuilding today, and that's his biceps and his chest. He had tremendous biceps, especially like a really nice peak, and he had a massive chest, like one it just popped out like crazy, like no other. Obviously, after bodybuilding, he got into movies and then became the Governor and stuff. I mean, he's just really created bodybuilding into what it is today. And in fact, as of right now, the Arnold Classic actually pays more than the Mr. Olympia bodybuilding competition, which kind of like puts it right on the same level, if not even higher, because a lot of bodybuilders are going to start going where the money is. You know, I think the Mr. Olympia still has a lot of prestige because of its history, but the Arnold Classic, who knows, if he keeps like outdoing it, maybe it will eventually be the #1 bodybuilding show in the world. It's definitely number 2 right now, and it definitely has the best expo out of pretty much any sporting event I've ever seen. So yeah, when you think of golden era bodybuilders, you definitely think of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, my honorable mention for this era is actually in the late golden era, and that's Lee Haney. This guy was kind of the last Mr. Olympia before the mass monster era, and he actually broke Arnold's record and won the Mr. Olympia 8 times. He had a really good mix of muscle mass and aesthetics with a really small and narrow waist. On stage, he was somewhere around 5'11", 245 pounds, and he had a fairly small waist at about 31 inches or so. Not only this, but I've heard that this guy is like one of the nicest guys in all of bodybuilding. And like I said, he won the Mr. Olympia 8 times before Dorian Yates took over and introduced the mass monster era starting in the 90s and going to modern day. Dorian Yates was a great bodybuilder, having won the Mr. Olympia 6 times. However, he's not the first person that comes to my mind, not even the second person that comes to my mind when I think about the mass monster era. In fact, the first person that comes to my mind when thinking about the mass monster era of bodybuilding, and arguably one of the best bodybuilders of all time, is the one and only Ronnie Coleman. This guy was crazy. 5'11" and about 300 pounds on stage. And I don't know if you've seen those videos of him where he's like leg pressing like a ton, literally a ton, or, you know, dumbbell pressing 200s. This guy is just insane. And he's known for quoting, "Yeah, buddy! Wait, baby! Oh, yeah. He was jacked, and when he was lifting like 2,000 pounds, he just screamed lightweight like it's nothing. So this guy is tied with Lee Haney with 8 Mr. Olympia wins. He absolutely dominated in the early 2000s. So he's said to have had about 24-inch biceps, a 36-inch waist, and a 58-inch chest. On top of this, he has like one of the best backs in history. I mean, it's just huge and shredded with crazy striations, especially in the glutes and stuff. So this guy was basically unbeatable for a long time. And then eventually we got Jay Cutler that came and took over after him. And my honorable mention for this era of bodybuilding is Phil Heath, because he's also a 7-time Mr. Olympia winner, just like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And in his prime, he had a phenomenal physique, and in my opinion, some of the best arms in bodybuilding history. On stage, he was about 5'9", 240 pounds, had 23-inch biceps, a 54-inch chest. It says that he had a 29-inch waist on stage. I'm not sure about all that, to be honest, because that does seem like a 29-inch waist is like so small, especially for how big these guys actually are. I mean, he definitely has a small waist compared to his upper body and legs and stuff. He's got that nice X shape to his physique. I don't know if it's exactly 29, but either way, he's definitely one of the people that define the mass monster era. Now, bodybuilders today are still massive. Yet, I think that things are starting to change finally and starting to go back towards a more classic era style of physique. I mean, with the introduction of classic bodybuilding, and that seems to be the most liked category in all of bodybuilding right now. I know from a personal standpoint, that's the one that I like the most. Even the massive guys now have a smaller waist and are starting to do more of those classic poses like the vacuum and things like that. So I like the direction that bodybuilding's starting to go in. I think the mass monster era was not my favorite. I really liked how they looked in the golden and silver eras. But which era was your favorite, and which of these physiques do you like the most? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.